ladies and gentlemen, you are all welcome to this press conference. Today we are launching a campaign which we call Leave No One Behind, Citizen Dialogues. Now, we have put one of the hashtags is Tondeka Mabega, but they have also told me that there are many other ways you can say it. In Lusoga, it has an H somewhere. In Ruchiga Runyankore, it has a Takansiga in Runyoro, it's also something else. But you all understand what we are trying to do in these dialogues is to say we need to leave no citizen behind in the attainment of the Sustainable Development Goals. So today, ladies and gentlemen, the Agenda 2030 Civil Society Core Reference Group, which has all the members that are seated here and more, launches a local campaign dubbed Tondeka Mabega, Leave No One Behind Citizen Dialogues. The Citizen Dialogues are a campaign that is aimed at amplifying the voices of the marginalized groups and demand for a fundamental shift in national and global policy commitments to ensure that we end inequality and poverty, which we all know perpetuate human suffering. The dialogues will build momentum for all citizens across Uganda to participate in the implementation and the achievement of the Sustainable Development Goals at all levels, using all the resources we have at local, at national, as well as at the global level. We all recall that in September 2015, last year, there was an official launch of a very bold and transformative agenda globally called the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development Goals that was adopted by the world leaders at the United Nations. It is now 1 year since the launch of those Sustainable Development Goals, and the world has 15 years to achieve this ambitious program. There are 17 goals. For those of you who don't know them, I will give you a copy. And if you look behind me, they are also there. And those goals have 165 targets. So this is a very daunting task for the global community. But we know that with the commitment of all, we can only say there is no looking back. Specifically for us as Uganda, we went down in history as the country that chaired the United Nations General Assembly in 2015, with Honorable Sam Kutesa spending a full year as the president of the United Nations Assembly. We have to commend ourselves as a country for being part of this history. We also have to appreciate that this history comes with enormous responsibility. At the recent high-level political forum to review the implementation of the SDGs, Uganda was one of the countries that volunteered to be peer-reviewed in July this year. In our readiness report, Uganda noted that it is ready to implement the Sustainable Development Goals and that the country has integrated the Sustainable Development Goals in the National Development Plan. It should be remembered that the Sustainable Development Goals replaced the Millennium Development Goals that were supposed, and therefore this was supposed to correct some of the omissions of the Millennium Development Goals. One of the key omissions of the Millennium Development Goals was that the Millennium Development Goals focused on symptoms of extreme poverty and the provision of basic social services in poor countries. They, however, overlooked some of the structural flaws of the global economic system and the responsibility of the Western world. Today, we know that that is history, because the SDGs are for all countries to implement. this is a global agenda that is anchored on the principle of universality. For long as we have continued to sell the idea that there are some developed countries in the north and other underdeveloped countries in the south, what the Sustainable Development Goals compel us to do is to know that in the world, everybody is integrated. And we are all part of the same Mother Earth, and we should all care for it in the same way. That is important, ladies and gentlemen, because many times people blame especially continents like Africa as if the problems of the world are only here in Africa. So this phrase that was adopted as a key rallying point for the SDGs, this phrase of leave no one behind, is really a key phrase that captures the global commitment. It is a nice sounding phrase, but one that can turn into rhetoric very quickly. It can turn into something we just talk about. So as world leaders prepare for the UN summit to review the first year of implementation of SDGs, we think that they need to pay more attention to this idea of leaving no one behind. And in order for the world leaders to pay attention, we have decided to do something very simple that can help us to ensure that we amplify the voices of those who are poor, who are marginalized, and who are vulnerable. And we amplify these voices to our policymakers here in Kampala, but also to the world leaders that will be meeting in New York in September of this year. I know that the Uganda government will be represented. Possibly our president or someone else will go. Now, Tondeka Mabega, which Leave No One Behind citizen dialogues, will take place in remote communities across Uganda among people whose voices are not always heard. We shall record these voices and ensure that these voices reach our leaders in different parts of the country. Tondeka Mabega Leave No One Behind citizen campaigns, dialogues, are not just an exercise in making meek demands to government, but they are also a process of documenting the different ways in which people who are left behind and what they are doing to make sure that they catch up with the world, and also how they would like the world to support them to move forward. Today, as citizens of Uganda, you all know we are saddened by several statistics, but I'll just mention a few. The poverty levels, while we celebrate that poverty went down, and that was one of the achievements that we celebrate in the MDGs for having been able to cut poverty by a half, as per the statistics that we have as a country. We also know that we have many backsliders. Those of you who go to church, you know that if you backslide, you actually run back to sin. Now, the backsliders in Uganda have risen. The people who are backsliding back into poverty. As we speak now, between 2005 and 2009, and I quote those statistics because they are the ones we have, around 40% of those who were in poverty were again living in poverty in 2011. Now, who had gone out of poverty were again living in poverty. Now, that's not a good thing, because that means that we are going 2 steps forward and 4 steps backwards. We also know that we have many excluded groups. The women, as my colleagues will tell you, still continue to have several categories of excluded populations. The children, the older persons, persons with disabilities, migrant communities, in the recent past and actually in the present, the number of refugees, all these continue to be something that should be of a concern, because they affect how these different groups access basic social services. For the young people, my colleagues should be able to tell you that the issue of unemployment of young people is now at a crisis level. With levels going up to 80%, it is certainly unacceptable. If we go to the environment, you all know that we are dealing with several threats. There are communities in this country that need to be relocated. The flooding, even in this city, is becoming unacceptable. And all those things tell you that there is something happening on the climate. But also, when we look at agriculture, our agriculture is still largely rain-fed. And when it is largely rain-fed, it means we are only having to subject our future to the masses of those who open the taps in heaven. The pledge to leave no one behind is a pledge that is at the heart of the SDGs, but it should be a pledge that should be meaningful to all. It means that the SDGs and the targets of the SDGs should be met for everyone and by everyone, with a particular focus on those who are poorest, most vulnerable, and farthest behind, and those who are the hardest to reach. So this is something that we should all be thinking about. So we urge our leaders to live up to the commitments that have been made and ensure that no one is left behind in the implementation of SDGs. And in Uganda, this will be within the context of our national as well as district involvement plans. And we would really like to see that these plans take this agenda into consideration. The second action we would like to see, want to see that we do everything possible to finance our future of ensuring that we leave no one behind. Because world leaders should collectively ensure that there is sufficient financial flows that are made available to deliver all the goals in time. See, sometimes we sit here and we hear things like, oh, there is no more money from donors. What will you do if they stop? Well, we would like to say that if we are going to achieve the Sustainable Development Goals, everybody should be able to do something. Those who are poor, we shall do something. Those who are rich should do something. Because we have agreed as a globe that we should help each other in development. So we should not have this situation where those who have think that they have the option of doing nothing about poverty in the world. Poverty in the world is everybody's concern. The other third action we would like to see is that we would like to also ensure that citizens across this country and in the world, we hold our leaders accountable as well as ourselves. As citizens organizations, which are the civil society organizations, we shall monitor and we shall communicate progress in implementing these goals. We hope that Parliament, civil society, human rights defenders, and other stakeholders will need to be central to this process. So we call upon all the different partners across the country to really think about this whole question of ensuring that we account to each other. The Equal Opportunities Commission in this country should really pay attention to this agenda, because I think when we say leaving no one behind, we are really talking about the idea that people like the Equal Opportunities Commission should be able to say what are we doing about the vulnerable people in this country. But also the Committee on Equal Opportunities in Parliament, I think, should now think about this whole question. I saw that they had started some actions, including getting foreign traders out of Kampala. But I think that is one part of the larger question of inequality. And so we'd like to see a lot more done to ensure that we do something about inequality. And the last action is that we also want to advocate that the economy has to work for all of us. It has to work for all the society. Because what the SDGs have done for us is that they have made it possible for us to see that what is good for the economy and what is good for the poor, to reduce poverty and inequality, can actually converge. At some point in economics, we thought that poverty and what is good for the poor and what is good for the economy are things that are divergent. But now we see that they converge when we think about things like inequality. The IMF will tell you that inequality itself is something that affects the rights of people, that are people with who have no rights are susceptible to inequality. So when we agree to ensure that we leave no one behind, then economic growth has to be inclusive and inequality has to be focused on decisively. So we urge our government to ensure that things like jobless growth, which is what we have today, we are growing at over 6%, but we don't see the jobs. So you wonder, where is the growth going? Maybe the growth is in the buildings, maybe the growth is in the big cars, because each one, every day we buy a bigger car. So we urge our government to ensure that really jobless growth is something that is eradicated, and the commitment to become a middle-income country should also be a commitment to ensure that Ugandans become middle-class people. Because being a middle-class country and being a middle-class people are two different things. Because when you become a middle-class people, then you are served by a democratic state and a developmental state. So that is something that we should all be adhering to. So ladies and gentlemen, that was to quickly summarize what this campaign is all about and what it's going to do. I should say that our partners across the country will be continuously carrying out these dialogues. I know that tomorrow the colleagues in Mukono are going to start. I don't know the village name, but I know that there is a village in Mukono that is going to start tomorrow. And I know that on Friday, colleagues in Bushenyi will also be doing a campaign, and many others will be rolled out in the next week, and we shall be making this available, the information available to all of you. And we encourage you to go and listen in to some of these dialogues, and to see that the voices of people who are not heard every day can actually shape this agenda here locally, but also globally when we get to reviewing the Sustainable Development Goals. So ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for listening.